Thanks, Sam, and welcome, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about identification and plumbing down that portion of CIP, customer identification programs that everyone has set up. And a lot of times what happened is people set up their customer identification programs back in '03 when it became law. And maybe it's time now to look at those IDs and expand them and learn more about the types of identification we might choose to accept in the opening of new accounts, because, of course, the choice is yours. And what a great way to say that, and it's a great thought that it always has been our choice about the types of ID our financial institutions will take or accept or not accept. And you can actually have probably two sets of procedures that might make sense. You might be using ID for opening of accounts, and that might be at one standard. And then you also might be using identification for check cashing, and that might be a different set of identifications. Now, sometimes they're mirror images of one another, but sometimes there may be IDs that you don't feel comfortable with opening an account, but to cash a check you might take for check cashing procedures. So I thought we'd start at the beginning of this. And our agenda today, to kind of set in context what we're going to be talking about, we want to start with something called the Customer Identification Program, which is Section 1020 of the Bank Secrecy Act. And then we'll move through different types of identifications in no particular order of importance, just some things that people are looking at and have questions about, and some of the different types of identification. And then towards the end, I want to wind up with this issue about Social Security numbers, ITIN numbers, marriage and divorce name changes, perhaps some religious issues such as the Amish with the lack of picture ID, and anything else that you want to talk about in the realm of identification. Even want to mention maybe online account opening, because a lot of times you are recording identification, but you're not looking at identification. And that brings us to, where this all started. And it really all started with a law called the U.S. Patriot Act. And if you remember that President Bush signed the U.S. Patriot Act into law after 9/11, and there was a section in the Patriot Act, and this particular section in the Patriot Act, Section 326, had a three-part mandate. And that three-part mandate of the U.S. Patriot Act required that we verify the identity of any person who opens an account. And it actually said seeking in the beginning, and they came back and they said what we mean by that is someone that really opens an account, and then maintaining records of information and consulting the list of terrorists. And so that was translated into the U.S. Treasury, wrote the regulation as mandated by Congress, and it was translated into the Bank Secrecy Act, Section 1020, in that Section 1020 area. And basically what this comes down to is a more formalized approach to new accounts. So when you have this more formalized approach, and what I mean by that, if you date back in our business, some of you probably remember the little signature cards like I do that were little 3x5 cards. Ours were green and orange at the bank that I used to work for, and one for business accounts, one for personal accounts. And it was a very informal process, really. There was no huge contracts and disclosures, and that has changed all over time. But CIP says before we even talk about documents that you're going to get the name, physical address, date of birth, and tax ID number of the person you're opening an account for. And if it's an entity, you're going to get the name, physical address, and EIN, if there's an EIN number to be obtained. Again, sometimes there's those kind of hybrids like sole proprietors where they might use a social security number. But that information has to be gotten before the account is open. And then this is the piece that we're really talking about today, verification through documents. What kind of documents, what kind of IDs, particularly people, are we going to accept? And then what is non-document verification, of course, is things that you might do like third-party vendors and Google and It could be calling them up, thanking them for their business, things that look like sales and service. And then the government checklist, always OFAC, and the 326 list has never been populated. And we record all of this, and this is where the mandate comes from. But what is important about all of this, and it's really important to understand, is that you only run CIP on what you define as a customer. Now, the regulation says that a customer is a person that opens an account, or an individual opens an account for an individual who lacks legal capacity, or an entity that's not a legal person, such as a civic club. And it does not include financial institution, Phase 1 exemptions on CTRs for the most part, and anybody that had an existing account with you on 10/1/2003. Although, be mindful about that. You had to put that in your policy, 10/1/2003, and that doesn't mean that due diligence doesn't apply. As I always say, when the customer comes back in and opens another account, we would always ask, is everything on this system correct? Do you have updated ID? Because that's just normal business in the United States now. Anywhere you go, if you check in a hotel now, they want to see ID. So we're talking more from the account opening perspective today, but that doesn't mean on an ongoing basis that you wouldn't want to see updated ID. And also, you don't have to run CIP if it's not an account that's covered. So the information is the critical issue, and that has to be done prior to the opening of the account, which gets kind of interesting if they're military and they don't have a U.S., they don't have a physical address, but they might have an Army post office box or a Fleet post office box. You can take that. If your account holder is in transition, then you can take a next of kin, or, they're moving from one state to another, then you can take a next of kin or a business street address. So, again, the customer is going to be a person for most part, and it'll be an entity. But if you came back and said the definition of customer includes all owners and all signatories, then you also have to run your CIP on all signatories of your financial institution. So the choice is yours. You made it 10/1/2003. If you haven't changed it in all of these years, it is probably time to relook at that. We used to have like a little list: primary ID, U.S. government, U.S. military, driver's licenses, non-driver's ID cards, passport, and resident alien cards, the green cards as we fondly call them. And if it wasn't one of those, forget it. We'd always get a second piece of ID, but there was no law on this in the past, and there's really no law that says you have to do it today. What you do have to do, though, is set a policy for CIP, go ahead and define customer in either the narrowest sense or the broadest sense, and then list in your procedures what you're going to take and what you're not going to take. And that becomes your program, and the examiners will not hold you accountable to somebody else's program down the street. They're going to hold you accountable to yours. If you said 2 IDs before the account is open, then you better be getting 2. If you said 1 and you got 10 days to get it, then you got a 10-day grace period. These were the things that your financial institution chose. So if they're not working for you, then you have to go back and re-choose them. People have been calling me lately about online banking. It seems like everybody's getting into online banking this year, like this is the year for online banking. But again, online banking, you might not get any documents because you never had to be an institution that relied on documents. They're going to use more out-of-pocket questions and non-document verifications. So in your CIP policy that you wrote, you would go in and put a paragraph about online account opening and how it's different, what you'll do differently for minors, what you might do differently for elderly, because these are groups of people that were mentioned in the regulation commentary at the beginning so that you could come back and address those special issues. And I would say the only one that wasn't really addressed in the regulation was the particular issue of religious purpose, where people might not want photocopies of IDs. But again, there are alternatives that you could put in your program